to episode 11 of Spanish Answers. I'm really excited that we are now in the teens, as it were, of this program. So, anyways, my in-laws are coming at the time of this recording, and I don't have a lot of time to record. So, I'm going to break this next topic up into a little bit more bite-sized pieces. I haven't figured out yet if it's going to be in 2 parts or in 3 parts, but for now, we're starting with part 1, and that's going to be talking about el Voseo, which, if you've never heard about that, don't worry, I only recently learned about it, and I am super psyched to talk with you about it, to tell you about its history, about where it's used, and most importantly, how you can use it. Alright, so let's go ahead and get started. So, what is the Voseo? Well, basically, it's where you use vos instead of tú. It's not the same as vosotros. Very, very different. But vos. V-O-S. V like Victor, O-S. Vos. So in Spanish, there are 2 different ways of saying you, correct? There's the usted and then there's the tú. And usted is much more formal and tú is more familiar, like with friends and family. For example, we have the verb tutear, which is to use tú with someone. Nosotros tuteamos los perros. Or tutearse, which is to be really, on familiar terms with someone. So, ellos se tutean porque son buenos amigos. So, nosotros tuteamos los perros. We use tú with dogs. And ellos se tutean porque son buenos amigos. They use tú with each other because they are good friends. Well, vocear is basically the same thing as tutear, but it's for vos instead of tú. So, nosotros voceamos a los niños. Nosotros voceamos a los niños. We use vos with children. So, where is el voceo used? According to the Real Academia de Español, or the RAE, as it's more commonly called, is the main countries where voceo is used, or vos, is in Argentina, Bolivia, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Ecuador, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, Paraguay, Uruguay, and Venezuela. Now, obviously, this is not a complete list, and we're going to delve a little bit more into those countries, but for now, there are 3 main types of voceo usage, shall we say. And when I say el voceo, I'm talking about the use of vos, is really what it is. So you've got el tuteo, the use of tú, and you've got el voceo, the use of vos. So 3 main types of voceo usage are the complete voceo, or as they say in Spanish, el voceo completo o absoluto. And this is where you have the vos plus the verb conjugated in the vos form. Yes, there is actually a different conjugation for vos than there is for tú. And that is for a completely different episode later on. I'm hoping it'll be our 3rd part in this series, but for now, we're just going to use the example of comer. So, comer conjugated for vos is comes. C-O-M-E with an accent mark S. So, for example, the complete voceo, or voceo completo, would be vos comes. Vos comes. V-O-S-C-O-M-E with an accent mark S. The second type is el voceo verbal, or verbal voceo. And this is where you take tú and then you use the verb with the vos conjugation. So it's kind of a mix of tuteo and voceo. So it's, for example, it would be tú comes. C-O-M-E with an accent mark S. Lastly, there's the pronominal voceo, which is voceo pronominal. And that's where you take vos and add the verb conjugated in the tú form. So it'd be vos comes. C-O-M-E-S. No accent mark. It's just like you're conjugating it for tú. Vos comes. I'm going to do just a brief description of where voceo is used by country. And if you're listening to this via podcast, I highly recommend that you visit the YouTube channel for Spanish Answers and just look at the different color codes if you're a visual person. But I'll try and be pretty clear and organized in how I describe this. Let me know if I don't succeed. So, in Mexico or the Antilles, most of Peru and Venezuela, and the Atlantic coastal area of Colombia, they only use tú. There is no voceo. just tú. In Bolivia, northern and southern Peru, Ecuador, some of the Andean areas of Venezuela, and a large part of Colombia, Panama, and the eastern strip of Cuba, they use tú, and it's viewed as the educated form, but there is also the use of vos, and it's seen as more of an uneducated type of deal, but it is used. And then in Chile, the Zulia state in Venezuela, the Pacific coastal area of Colombia, Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, El Salvador, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, and the Mexican states Tabasco and Chiapas, they have 3 layers of formality. So they use tuteo, voseo, and usted. So if you want to be very formal, you use usted. If you want to be kind of formal, like this medium layer, then you use tuteo. And if you are being familiar, like with friends and family, then you'd use voseo. And then lastly, of course, in Argentina, Uruguay, and Paraguay, they use voseo all the way. No tú at all, just voseo. Then I guess just a side note for Spain, they don't really use voseo at all now. It's really only found in kind of formulaic sayings like vuestra merced or vuesa merced, and that's really for, your grace if you're addressing royalty or things like that. But we'll get more into that when we discuss the history of vos and why we have vos and tú used and mixed and not used in different parts of Latin America. So it'll be really fun. Alright, so let's talk a little bit about which countries use which forms of the voseo. So when it comes to the voseo completo, we have Argentina, Paraguay, and Uruguay, and they all use voseo. And again, voseo completo is where you have the vos plus the conjugated verb for vos. So vos comes, C-O-M-E with an accent mark, S, comes. Argentina, Uruguay, and Paraguay, they use voseo only and vos comes, voseo completo. With the exception of Uruguay's capital, Montevideo, where they use the voseo verbal, which is tú comes, C-O-M-E with an accent mark, S. In Ecuador, it really depends on where you're at if they're going to use tú or vos, but when they do use vos, it's voseo completo, but there are parts that mix the tuteo and voseo up. In Venezuela, they mainly use tuteo, but there are parts that do speak voseo, mainly the state of Zulia and some Andean territories, but when they do speak it, it's voseo completo. In Costa Rica, they will use tuteo. I mean, they do use it, but it's kind of seen as ostentatious or pretentious, and although they do use it more in the written word, as they do in Nicaragua. But in the rest of Central America, Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, and Costa Rica, they use that 3-tiered formality system. So usted, tuteo, and then voseo. In Colombia, on the Atlantic coast, they use tú. But the rest of the country uses tuteo as that intermediate formality and have that 3 layers of usted, tuteo, voseo. Panama has only certain areas, but they use the voseo completo, and that's kind of really in the interior portion, and then border areas with Costa Rica, and they're also going to alternate with tú, so vos or tú. In Panama, they do have slightly different verbal endings. I'm not certain that we'll get to that in future episodes, but just a heads up, if you are traveling to Panama, you're going to want to delve into those conjugations. Okay, in a lot of the countries where voseo is not the main usage, there is a stigma that it's used only by uneducated people, so definitely before you go to any Latin American country, if you really want to try your Spanish, make sure that you understand the connotations, as it were, of using vos versus tú. In some places, they're going to frown upon you using tú, and in other places, they're going to frown upon you using vos. Just do your research. Anyways, back to the Antillas. They use voseo in the eastern part of Cuba, but then the rest of the countries, like the Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, and most of Cuba, they use the tuteo, not voseo. And then in the north and eastern part of Bolivia, they also use the voseo completo in those zones. So when it comes to the voseo verbal, where it's tú comes, the tú with the vos conjugation of the verb, that's the voseo verbal, and tú comes, C-O-M-E with an accent mark, S. So the countries that use this are Chile, Guatemala, Argentina, Honduras, and Uruguay. Now again, not all of the countries all over the place use this, so just sometimes it's just portions. For example, in Argentina, only the provinces of Santiago del Estero and Tucumán use the Voseo verbal. The rest of Argentina uses the Voseo completo. Only certain areas of Honduras and Guatemala use Voseo verbal, and Guatemala also follows that interesting 3 layers of formality. So you've got the usted, tuteo, voseo. And it, again, only the voseo verbal is used in certain zones. Now, Chile is an interesting one. They also have a different conjugation for their verb, which hopefully we'll be able to go into in another episode. But one thing to keep in mind with Chile is that in situations of formality, it's definitely better to use tuteo. But when you're using the voseo, do not use the voseo pronominal, because in Chile, that is considered vulgar. So don't say vos comes. Vos and then comes with the to conjugation. That's vulgar. So only use the voseo verbal. Tu comes. Which is kind of fascinating that you would have that distinction, I think, with the voseo pronominal. Speaking of which, again, the voseo pronominal is really used in just 3 countries. That's Peru, Bolivia, Ecuador, at least that I could find. It's the least used version of the 3 voseos. Peru uses this, el voseo pronominal, in the northern and southern areas. The rest of the country really sticks to tu. Bolivia uses tu. It's viewed more as an educated type of deal if you use tu. The northern and southern areas use the voseo pronominal, but there are parts of Bolivia, like in the Andean areas, where they kind of mix them up. So you might have vos comes or tu comes, maybe. It's just kind of like a mix. In Ecuador, they really use the voseo pronominal really in rural zones or along the coast and the mountain range. But again, so just a quick overview. The voseo pronominal is really used in Peru, Bolivia, and Ecuador, again, in different parts, not the entire country. Same goes for the voseo verbal in Chile, Guatemala, Argentina, Honduras, and Uruguay. And then we have the voseo completo, which is used in Argentina, Paraguay, Uruguay, Ecuador, Colombia, Venezuela, El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, Panama, and the Antilles region, and Bolivia. But just, again, general rule of thumb, wherever you're traveling or whoever you're talking to, listen first, speak later. Before you use the voseo or tuteo, listen to what those around you or to the person you're talking to are saying. Or, which is much more straightforward and simple in my mind, just ask. Again, I tried to make this episode accurate, but there are a lot of different sources with a lot of different ideas. So just double check yourself wherever you're traveling to. This episode's definitely supposed to be more of a guide than an exact science. Again, all of my sources will be put in the show notes and at the end of this episode on YouTube, or for most of the mapping areas, I use the Gallivan College resource as well as the Portal de Lingüística Hispánica and El Estudio del Voseo en la Clase de Español by Maria Kapelusnik Rajmiel. I'm sure I butchered that last name. Anyways, that is all for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. I hope that this has been helpful, or at least a good way for you to get your feet in the water for the Voseo. If you have any questions or topics that you'd like me to discuss, please send them to me at contact@languageanswers.com. Again, that's contact@languageanswers.com. Or if you have corrections, I am definitely willing to hear them, because this was an interesting topic with varied sayings and conclusions from different resources. This episode was also produced by my business, Language Answers Ltd, at www.languageanswers.com. I am a translator from Spanish into English and a podcaster and an English editor. So if you have any English documents you want edited, or if you have a Spanish document that needs to be translated into English, go ahead and visit my website for a free quote. All right. I hope that this episode talking about the areas where you use vos or el voseo has been really helpful for you, at least in introducing you to the topic, and I hope that you're getting as excited about it as I am. If not, you're going to be really bored with the next couple of episodes and you should probably skip them. which might be a bad thing to tell someone when you're trying to promote your program, but whatever. Alright, so I will see you in 2 weeks. We'll delve more into the history of El Voseo and kind of explain how we got to where we're at with it all over the world, and then after that we'll talk about how you can use it. So I now need to go help my husband clean our house because it really, really needs it before they come. And yeah, so I'll talk to you later. Hope you have a great 2 weeks. Bye.